Welcome, dear readers. You're listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast book club. We're recording today from the Carol Shields Auditorium at Millennium Library in Winnipeg, which is within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ininew, and Dakota peoples, and in the National Homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. In this episode, we will be discussing The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. I'm Dennis from the Idea Mill, and to borrow a phrase from Father Ted, any discussions about forming a planetary alliance would be an ecumenical matter. Across the table from me is...
I'm Toby. I'm an outreach librarian based out of here at Millennium Library, and I will be waving Shifkerthor for this conversation. And across the table from me is...
Hi, I'm Trevor from the Louis Riel Library, and may the chill of the wind embrace you, my fellow hearthkin, as we share this frozen moment upon the threshold of connection. Welcome to the dance of contrasts, where warmth and cold intertwine in the embrace of friendship.
I thought one of you was going to make a pervert joke, so...
A good book can carry me away from an ever-urgent ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we wouldn't do this without you. We'd love to hear from you, so fire up the Ansible and send us a message, or you can email us. You can find our email address in all our social media outlets by going to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and scrolling to the bottom of the page. Hang around till the end of the episode to enjoy our favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. Before we dig in, let's do a quick check-in with the panel. How you guys doing?
I'm glad you're back.
Well, thank you.
How was your trip to the moon?
I went to the moon?
We're not supposed to talk about that.
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Never mind.
Yeah,
It was nothing happened.
Yeah.
Nothing.
That was close.
Yeah, I intended to read that book from last month too, but I got dragged down, and so it was good to hear that I was approximately correct in my interpretation of how the book would continue on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Chris Hadfield is a great astronaut.
Yes. Yes. Well, and definitely I understood his need to be accurate and show that he knew his stuff when he was talking about it. That's just, was a little slow. So anything exciting happen while I was gone?
Alice Munro died.
Oh.
Yeah. I feel like we should just,
That news
put
probably
that
didn't
out
make it to the
there.
moon.
Yeah.
No.
It's very sad. She's a Canadian legend, and...
No, she literally is a legend.
Yes.
Alice Munro, rest in power.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not. There's nothing funny about Alice Munro passing away.
No.
well, I think it's just because, usually we do a light bit, and then it's like,
I know.
Oh, yeah.
and here's a downer.
Sorry to bring it down.
All I was going to say is, it's raining out. That's the only thing I was going to talk about. But I got nothing,
Okay. Well, in that case, we should get on to talking about the book. So first, Toby's going to tell us about the author, and then Trevor will give us a summary of the book.
Okay. Ursula K. Le Guin. So Ursula Kroeber was born October 21st, 1929 in Berkeley, California, to author Theodora Kroeber and influential anthropologist Alfred Lewis Kroeber. The family had a large book collection, and Ursula and her siblings became interested in reading at a young age. She also developed an early interest in writing, submitting her first short story to a magazine when she was 11. Growing up in a household deeply immersed in academia and anthropology, Le Guin's early years were marked by a profound appreciation for storytelling and cultural exploration, elements that would later shape her literary career. She didn't fit in high school and found refuge at the library, where she read Austen, the Brontes, Turgenev, and Shelley. After high school, she went to Radcliffe College, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Renaissance French and Italian Literature in 1952, followed by a Master's at Columbia in French. She won a Fulbright scholarship to Paris, where she intended to do a PhD on medieval French poetry. However, on the boat to France, she met Charles Le Guin, who was writing his thesis on the French Revolution. The two had the same sense of humor, like the same books, and were engaged 2 weeks later, and Le Guin abandoned her PhD studies. The two lived in Georgia and Idaho before eventually settling in Portland. They had 3 children, Elizabeth, Caroline, and Theodore. Le Guin began writing full-time in the late 1950s. Her first published work was a poem in 1959, and then she published a short story in 1961. Her first novel, Rocannon's World, was published in 1966. She achieved major critical and commercial success with A Wizard of Earthsea, 1968, and The Left Hand of Darkness, 1969. The Left Hand of Darkness was considered groundbreaking for its radical investigation of gender roles and its moral and literary complexity. Known for her ability to blend elements of science fiction and fantasy with profound philosophical insights, Le Guin quickly established herself as a trailblazer in the genre. Throughout her career, she challenged conventional notions of gender, society, and power, often using her narratives to explore themes of social justice, environmentalism, and the human condition. She would go on to write 23 novels, 12 volumes of short stories and novellas, 11 volumes of poetry, 13 children's books, 5 collections of essays, and 4 volumes of translation. She won 6 Nebula Awards, 7 Hugo Awards, a National Book Award, and the PEN Malamud Award. 3 of her books have been finalists for the American Book Award and the Pulitzer. She was named a Living Legend by the Library of Congress in 2000 and awarded the National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters in 2014. Le Guin died January 22nd, 2018, at the age of 88.
So, Left Hand of Darkness. It's a groundbreaking science fiction novel written by Ursula Le Guin. It's set in the distant future. It follows the journey of Genli I, an envoy from the Ecumen, a collective of planets, who travels to the icy world of Gethen to persuade its nations to join the Ecumen. Gethen is inhabited by androgynous beings who can change their sex during their monthly reproductive cycle, a feature that challenges Genli's perceptions of gender and sexuality. The story primarily revolves around Genli's interactions with, I'm going to say Estraven, but that's just, I don't know, Estraven? A Gethenian politician who becomes his ally. Their journey across the harsh terrain of Gethen is both physical and metaphorical as they navigate political intrigue, cultural differences, and personal prejudices. Through their friendship, Le Guin explores themes of friendship, trust, and the fluidity of identity. As Genli and Estraven travel together, they encounter various societies and individuals, each offering insights into the complexities of Gethenian culture. Along the way, they face betrayal, hardship, and moments of profound connection. Through Genli's eyes, readers witness the beauty and brutality of Gethen, as well as the limitations of human understanding. The Left Hand of Darkness is not just a tale of interstellar diplomacy, but also a meditation on the nature of humanity, society, and the ways in which individuals shape their own destinies. Le Guin's masterful prose and imaginative world-building make this novel a timeless exploration of gender, politics, and the human condition.
So, how do you guys find it?
I was a bit lukewarm about this book. I thought the premise of it was really interesting. It's very well written, but it wasn't a book I looked forward to reading. You know, at the end of the day, when I get my pleasure reading time, I didn't pick it up and go, yay, I get to read another chapter of this book. I found it a bit cold, in more ways than one. At times it almost feels like reading critical theory or philosophy. It just got very heady with these cyclical conversations and ideas that I just wasn't that interested in. But I'm glad I read it. You know, I think it's important, and I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either.
Yeah, I had the same initial reaction to it that you did, Toby, especially when the first page, it's almost like gobbledygook, where it's like from the journals of Genli AI and this and that, and the 41st diurnal year of and I'm like, oh, I'm already not liking this because I don't understand these words. But I had the advantage of starting to read it almost immediately after we did our last podcast. So I read it fairly quickly. And then I've had almost a month to kind of go back into it here and there. And I found that although I found the initial reading very similar to your experience, I found just kind of going back and reading about the book and reading little sections out of order, that it's one of those books I think that it gets better on repeated reads, and that there are things in it that I certainly didn't pick up on the first time through. And so I've been having kind of fun treating it like almost like a textbook, and going back and reading little sections. And we can talk more about sort of the world building and things that are in it, I'm sure, in our discussion. But I've come to appreciate it over the last few weeks, and it's still, I'm still thinking about it. So that was my experience with it.
When I started it, I had that same reaction with all of and this is a thing with sci-fi where the author is creating a lot of language for the cultures in the book. It's like, oh, okay, there's like half of these words already are made up, and I am like, is it going to be like this the whole time? So thankfully that doesn't take too long to get past. And while I was reading the book, I tended to kind of ignore like everything about the dates and stuff. It's like, I didn't care. It's like, okay, it's later now.
It's less cold, more cold.
Yeah. And the edition that I was reading at the back, there's also like an explanation of the names of the dates and stuff. And it's like, I don't care. I don't care about that. And I also found at the beginning, Le Guin has a great vocabulary that was used well, but I found myself at the beginning constantly having to look up some of the words because it's like, okay, I think I understand this word, but it seems kind of harsh here. Like there were several things like that. At one point I referred to the people as insipid, and I'm like, wait, what's the exact meaning of that? And like the definition isn't as harsh as the connotation of it. Because insipid to me always implies that, you know, it's like you're insulting someone. It's not worth your time. And I was confused by that, like the tone of the writing. And it was only when I got to the end and I realized, oh, it's because the narrator is feeling this way about the people. And that language kind of changes a bit as the novel goes on. And it's not really that, it warms up later on in the book because his attitudes towards people has changed some. He's come to understand them better. And that was a subtlety that really surprised me when I realized it.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things that sort of I thought about afterwards is that, you know, the Ecumen, the group that sent Genly to be the envoy, which like the first contact, even though he isn't technically the first contact, they were kind of sneakily sent the investigators about 40 years before, but they were sent in secret. Right. I don't think the people of Gethin knew that they were being kind of cataloged and observed. So Genly was sort of the first openly alien person to arrive. But man, they could have done a better job in picking a different person because that guy.
Oh, he's so boring.
He's boring and he's kind of misogynistic.
Oh, he's such a misogynist.
And he's like, you know, when we meet him at the beginning of the story, he's been there for 2 years already. And it feels like he's just been kind of like messing around. Like he still doesn't know hardly. Like I don't know. I felt like after reading last month's book where everything was so efficient and everything was done so well and no one ever made a mistake, that I thought like, come on, Genly, get with the program. Like,
I think it makes sense in this context too, because like you're going in, even though they did some research, it's still a very foreign world. He didn't understand anything about politics, and Shifgerthor was totally beyond his understanding at the beginning. It was terribly confusing. But like, you know, it's an alien world. Yeah, in this universe, they're all seeded from the same original peoples, but they're developed very differently over thousands of years. And so how do you go into that?
And I mean, he is like our proxy, you know, he's a stand-in for like all of Earthlings,
That's right. Yeah.
to show like this alien planet. And if he was very familiar with it, then we wouldn't get all of that background.
That's a good point.
But I do, just he's so boring. Like, and maybe this is also partly Le Guin's fault, but we don't get any background knowledge of him either. Like, does he have a family? Mm-hmm. Has he been an envoy before on other planets? Has he been successful? Like, we don't know anything about him.
Yeah, we don't really get sort of his inner thoughts of like his own homesickness necessarily, or do we find out that he is not white?
Yeah, he's dark-skinned.
Dark-skinned.
Yes. But everyone is dark-skinned.
We don't know that. We know that he's dark-skinned compared to the Gathenians, who live in an environment where there isn't necessarily a lot of sun, so they might be really pale.
Yeah, that's true.
So we don't really know anything about him except that he's taller than them. Definitely.
Although, wouldn't people on Gethin have evolved to be darker? Would darker absorb heat more? I don't know.
No.
It's the opposite, isn't it?
The pigmentation of the skin is because of the skin's reaction to being exposed to a lot of sunlight, and it protects the skin from the sun. Okay. So that's why people from northern climes tended to be pale, and people from closer to the equator tended to be darker. Mm-hmm. And in this place, it's all cold all the time because the whole planet is in an ice age. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that they're all pretty pale. But I don't know. The description on that front wasn't very descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting too, like the people of Gethin are genderless in the way that we understand gender, but Genly always refers to them as a he.
Yeah, you know, I found that a little distracting.
Which again, I didn't like the first time through, and I'm thinking afterwards, well, maybe is this Le Guin's way of kind of speaking as Genly as this kind of ignorant guy who, I don't know.
Doesn't she say in the introduction that she used he because it's kind of the default? But I mean, this was the 60s or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
maybe if she was writing this today, she would use they, them. But it also, I think, does reflect Genly's outlook that he is seeing all of these people as male. And then, you know, he sees someone as a man displaying what he deems a feminine characteristic, and he's appalled and grossed out.
Yeah, and all the feminine characteristics to him are like weakness and negative, and all the male, which is just like every time, like, she's like, this book isn't the only book that takes place on Gethin or only story. After she wrote this book, like throughout her whole career, she's kind of gone back and explored some of the themes that she's introduced in this book and kind of fleshed them out a little bit. Like there was one short story I was talking about earlier about that focuses on one person who enters Khmer for the first time and talks about that in much more detail than is just sort of touched upon in the book. But in another story, which deals more with like the time travel aspect, I think it's called The Winter's King. And it's an interesting story about a king who gives birth to their heir. And they think the country is going to be left in good hands. And so then the king goes off world and then gets word that their child has turned into a tyrant. So the king decides to come back. But because of the vagaries and the weirdness of time travel, he's not any older than when he left. But his son is now an old man. And so he has to then usurp. Like, it's like he was the king and then he wasn't for like 60 years. Now he is again, but he hasn't aged. And in that story, she changed all the pronouns to she. So I guess it's, you know, it's a difficult thing when gendered pronouns are such a part of our language to try to write a story about a world where they don't matter or are not central. Yeah, she had to make some choices, I guess.
Yeah, and there weren't as many stories about that at the time that Le Guin wrote it. Now it would be, I think, easier to make a decision that makes more sense about how to use pronouns because we've got a lot more time thinking about pronouns than at the time. So it's like, yeah, in retrospect, maybe she would have done something different given a different circumstance. But at the time, yeah.
It does kind of lose the impact, though, of that. Like, you think of all of the characters as men because she's using he all the time, and you forget that they're not, that they have, besides Genly, you know, they don't have any genders.
It was a little difficult to pick out how the characters were being masculine or feminine from the writing.
Except, I guess, when Genly notes it.
But didn't Genly refer to like his landlady?
Yeah.
Although it was his landlady when they weren't in Khmer, right?
Yeah.
So it was a unless it was one of the few that was always in Khmer, but I don't think
No.
they were. No.
I think it was just this person was like fat or something, or like curvy, and so
Yeah.
Well, and I also think he was applying a gender role that he was familiar with to another situation. Like, well, you know, you have landladies. Sure. Okay. They can be a landlady. Yeah.
But I'm sure this person was also exhibiting what he considered feminine characteristics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you talk about how he was like overly chatty or you know, and this kind of stuff, and not in like a good way.
The character was definitely very judgmental. Although, again, that did seem to ease up towards the end of the book. So in that sense, it was the personal journey of the envoy as he discovered, you know, how to come to accept a very different kind of way of viewing people.
Yeah, and I mean, our protagonists don't have to be perfect. Like, I mean, if we're talking, this is almost a situation like a colonization situation. So, you know,
I don't know. I wouldn't say it's colonization.
Or like maybe the very, very first step of like because this Ecumen group, although you're right.
All they can do is share information.
Yeah, they're not
too far away.
Calling. You're right.
Yeah.
They're more of like
it's
almost
like a United Nations,
like a cosmic chamber of commerce.
Yeah,
kind of like it's not. They just want to communication and sharing ideas and resources. So yeah, maybe it's not like as analogous to colonization because they didn't come in force. They came with one person.
Yeah, and purposefully.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
There was that one line near the beginning where he was saying how like men like to be recognized for their virility and women like to be recognized for their I forget what he said, but And here you were only
femininity, was it maybe?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But here you could only be judged by your humanity, and that was terrifying.
Yeah. Wasn't that in the report from the investigators when he was talking about whoever they send as the envoy is going to have to either be extra, like have a thick skin, or be kind of a simpleton, because he won't be able to understand, or his ego won't be able to take the idea that these people aren't recognizing him as being a virile man or something, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I don't know how much of that worldview is specific to the time. I feel like people now, if they were put into that situation of being an envoy, it wouldn't be as difficult as it seems to be for this character, aside from the whole thing about being on another world entirely. But maybe I'm mistaken.
Well, it seems like she also, I don't know if she outright says it, but she kind of hints at the idea that because there is no male-female gender, or no male gender, that's one of the reasons why there's very little conflict, or at least like large scale conflict in war. Like they
can't mobilize.
Yeah. There's something maybe inherently, I don't know, martial about the testosterone that, you get guys together, they want to conquer other places, but because that part is kind of removed from their humanity, there's these little kind of tiffs, like the little border dispute that was happening, but the idea of actually full-scale war on that planet is just nothing. And then flying also, right?
Because they don't have birds.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And so they can't picture anything that would fly. I wonder if they would have insects, though. Although it's very cold. So
probably not.
Yeah, probably no insects either.
Well, there's all sorts of aspects you could wonder about, like the dietary things, because the period that things could grow would be very short for crops. And then do they have pollinators? And yeah, but Le Guin doesn't write to be scientifically accurate. I think one of the things I read about what she said about the book was that it's not intended to extrapolate anything or whatever. It's a thought experiment. It's it's like we're talking about now, but we're doing a thought experiment so you can think through maybe how an idea might work, which is something I appreciate from science fiction. You can do a lot of interesting thought experiments. And in that case, you don't necessarily have to be scientifically accurate.
Yeah, in your biography, you mentioned that her parents, or her dad was like an anthropologist.
He was, yes.
So you can kind of like see that like she really wants to focus on sort of the people and the cultures, but maybe not the minutia of the science of how will this actually work with the food and stuff. Because I was thinking the same thing. It wasn't fleshed out in that way, but she spent a lot of time in like, how do people interact with each other, and how do societies form, right? Because we have that one country, Karhide, which is a monarchy. Mm-hmm. And then just across the border, there's the one that starts with an O that I can't pronounce.
Orgorian?
And they're the same people, right? They're Gathenians, but two totally different sets of government. The other one is like a totalitarian kind of
it's kind of like
bureaucracy.
A police state.
Yeah, a police state with these like, what do they call them? Voluntary farms.
Oh, yes. The labor camps.
Yeah, the labor camps. But I mean,
yeah, but also it's like, you show up on the border, got nothing. Yeah, we'll get you a job. It's like a communist in that sense, and you're not left out on the street like you would be in Karhide if you came across the border and had nothing.
Right.
It was an interesting contrast there. And also in Karhide, it was like really tough to get anyone to kind of believe him. Whereas in Orgorian, it was like, sure, we'll talk to you, we'll listen to you, we'll also like sabotage you from behind and then arrest you and send you off to prison. So it's very different responses, very different kind of governments.
I do wonder, because, Le Guin was writing this in the 60s, if she's thinking Karhide is like the U.S. and then Orgorian is Russia. They're both on the same planet, but they're, entirely different places that would have very different reactions to an alien.
Yeah, well, in the sense, too, like Karhide, I think he said basically that there wasn't really a lot of nationalism in the countries. Orgorian was like the most organized country, the most national kind of country, and Karhide was trying to be, which is why they were trying to, at least that one minister was trying to stir up the border dispute so that they could maybe actually go to war, trying to foment something so that there would be more organization. But otherwise, there wasn't really naturally that kind of us versus them mentality. Also focused a lot on the hospitality of everybody. Like, you know, you came through a small town, you could say, hey, can you house me? And they would like house you and give you food and stuff like that, no matter where you went.
That was in Carhide.
No, that was in Orgorian.
Oh, okay,
It was
right.
I was in both?
It was in Carhide. Because when they came back from the crossing the ice fields, they stayed at a few different places, and just anyone would take them in. They just didn't tell them who Estraven was because he had been banished. So they...
Yeah, they went like from hearth to hearth kind of thing. And
Yeah.
But did that also happen in the other country?
I thought it did, but maybe I'm...
Well, no, there generally was taken in by the government, essentially, like by one of the ministers, because Estraven had kind of let them know, this is the alien, he's coming by, you should talk to him. And so he was being hosted. So we don't really know if they also did that in Orgorian, because that never really came up, because they were... First, he was being taken care of, and Estraven had a job, because they found you housing, right? And then they assigned you a job.
Yeah.
So you weren't really staying with someone, you were assigned a home. And
Estraven showed up on the shores kind of without his ID, and because he was in exile, right?
Yeah.
He left Carhide,
Yeah.
and then they found him a place. But then I'm thinking of like with Genly, I'm a little unclear exactly. So I remember like he was crossing the border, kind of up near where that skirmish was, and then the house he was staying in, it turned out there was a fight, or
That was a confusing moment
Yeah.
because he was dreaming, and then it
yeah.
became reality,
Right.
and then you weren't quite sure, and then later on he says, oh, I was in this place when it was raided, and you're like, oh, okay, that actually happened.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
it was all confusing. He said he was in a line, and he heard someone call his name, and he was taken out of the line. So I guess that part, like that string of events, it seemed kind of dreamlike, and I didn't really quite get how he got from that small little village on the border to like the upper ups in the government, because at that point then they were talking to him. So I don't know, was it?
well, I think he showed up there, and then there was an attack because of the border skirmishes. And then when they figured out who he was, and then immediately started, that one person who was like a governor or something kind of in charge of that area, he was like, oh, you stay at my place and we'll take care of you.
Of the commissels, or whatever they called their organized, like their, I don't know, what would you even call it? Like
They're ministers, they're oligarchs.
yeah, like
Yeah.
the municipalities, or for lack of a better word, like yeah.
There are a lot of concepts in here which are a little difficult to wrap your head around because it's just foreign enough to not quite match what you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what did you guys think about the spiritual and the religious aspects of some of the planet? Like I'm thinking of is it the Hadara?
Is it the Hadera who do the foretelling?
The foretelling, yes.
I thought the foretelling was really strange.
There's a scene early on where Genly, he leaves the capital and he wants to kind of tour around a little bit, and I think he goes east into like a more kind of forested area, or there's another city he visits, but he wants to visit, like they call them the fastnesses, which I guess were almost like monasteries.
Yeah.
And he goes to understand what foretelling is, because he's heard that there's this very holy people have the gift of, fortune telling, really. And he goes to this little community and spends some time there and meets, is it Fax? F-A-X-E or something? It was like the head.
The Weaver.
Yeah.
The Weaver, yeah.
Yeah.
And from that moment, there's a very weird, kind of upsetting scene where they have people that are maybe
there's like
mentally
the
challenged,
mutes and the perverts.
the zanies,
Yeah.
and they all come together, and they're all doing different things, but they're kind of complementary. Like one is kind of screaming, the other one is like banging his head, and yet throughout all of this like chaos, the Weaver is able to literally weave the answer to his particular question, which was, in 5 years, will Gethin be part of the Ecumen, or whatever.
Yeah.
I do wonder if this is where Le Guin was trying to be funny or cheeky.
You think?
I don't know.
Well, I think this might be the whole, what do you say, not archaeology, the whole anthropological side, like the spirituality. Because apparently Le Guin was into like Taoism and like Middle Eastern religions, and so was trying to put something like that in there, something mystical, something that's not strictly rational or easy to understand, something that would be mysterious enough that would be interesting.
I mean, there's also that anecdote about the foretellers when someone asked them about the meaning of life and they all kind of went insane.
Yeah.
Or like...
That one character, Mesh.
Yeah, or that character who asked them... What was the question he asked? If he was gonna... Oh, I forget what it was.
If he would live longer than so-and-so.
Right, but he kept like having to rephrase the question because he was asking it wrong.
Was that the one when the answer, you'll die on the 19th day, and then he kept trying to avoid it, but then eventually he did? Like the prophecy came true because
But he just like needed to find the right way to ask the question.
Right. Because there was a story like we can't answer questions, or there's something about there's a folly in having the right answer to the wrong question, or something. That there was like an interesting kind of take.
I think that was the entire point, that we're always looking for answers, but having the answer to the wrong question doesn't help you. So I think that was the whole point of that. Yeah. But it's kind of like it happens, and then it doesn't really affect the rest of the story much until later, when it's like, oh, well, actually they do become part of the ecumen. Yeah. So,
and that fax guy, the weaver, he becomes a government official, and he becomes the person, or they become the person that meets when the rest of the envoy comes, right? He's sort of like the liaison kind of.
Yeah.
But when you mentioned Chinese Taoism, there's so much of the book that is kind of a duality, like even like the Left Hand of Darkness. The title is the Left Hand of Darkness is the I can't remember now.
The Right Hand of Light.
The Right Hand of Light. And that poem was like the light and dark. And you see it all over the place in the book, like the hot or warm beer, this idea of the drinks and the cold versus like the intense heat. And I mean, if you look at the book sort of through that kind of lens, you can't stop at seeing all these like interesting parallels that are like oppositional, but at the same time, take them together, it kind of makes sense.
I think that was a big, theme where the balance was what was important. It wasn't about being all the way one way or another way. It's about having some balance there. And in that sense, the sexuality of the people is kind of relevant there, because their sexuality is balanced. They have both male and female aspects and could be either one. They didn't talk about it explicitly in the book, but I love the idea that, since no one knows whether or not they may bear a child or sire a child, you'd never set up laws that made it harder for one or the other, because it would just affect you, right? Whereas people who make laws here on this earth, there's definitely an imbalance based on what you think is going to happen to you.
Yeah, there's like anyone between the ages roughly of 16 or 17 and 35 could potentially, mother a child. And so because of that, everyone has... There isn't that dichotomy, because everyone shares in that potential experience, which again, for someone like Genly, or for any of us reading it, but especially Genly, who just could not really wrap his head around it.
Mm-hmm. What I find interesting too, I was wondering how we were going to talk about this book, but what I've noticed in our discussion is that there's very little talk about the plot.
There's not a lot of plot.
Yeah. Well, there is some, and I did find some of the political machinations interesting. But the thing about this book is that whatever happens in the plot, it's really about the ideas behind everything that keep you thinking about the book, which, is, I think, a strength when it comes to sci-fi. Did you have any thoughts about the plot?
I mean, I found the last bit of that book, I mean, I guess it was a big chunk. It was probably the last third, maybe, when they're traveling over the ice. I found that so boring. I was like, just get to your destination. How many ways can you describe snow and ice and snowfall and more ice and I
on the 39th day, we set up our tent.
And also, like, maybe I've been reading too many Ice Planet Barbarian novels, but when you're stuck on an ice planet and you're in a tent out, waiting out a blizzard with a handsome alien who is going through his sexy time, like, what a lost opportunity there.
You were hoping that they were going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, weren't you? Like, there was some tension there.
I was thinking they were going to.
I was not expecting it.
Really?
I was, I don't know. I saw it as a friendship developing, like the relationship between Genly and Estraven. I found very interesting.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, right at the beginning, and for a big chunk of the book, Genly did not trust Estraven at all because he didn't understand the way that they communicated. And in that last part, it's finally like, oh, there was this point, like, realization of how much Estraven had done in his service, in trying to help him, in being loyal to him. To me, that type of experience isn't necessarily a romantic one. But it's a profound one. So to me, that whole thing was that's how I think it would have played out if I were Genly.
But it's interesting, like, because at one point during their, whatever it was, 75-day journey, S. Straven does go into Kemmer.
And it's apparently extremely uncomfortable to go through Kemmer and to not have it satisfied, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they did actually talk about it a bit, didn't they? Like, I think Straven said, I think we shouldn't touch, or there was, like, so, I mean, I'm sure there was that sexual tension in the tent, and they were both aware of it, but they both, I don't know, just yeah, maybe it's more powerful that they didn't, but, like,
Genly would have gotten some points from me if he had. I mean,
I was talking to a coworker who's also a woman who also said she thought it was going to be a romance and was disappointed that it was not. I wonder if that's a gendered difference in reading it.
Maybe.
I mean, I guess they definitely, we can agree, they definitely became close. You know, they would die for each other.
Estraven did die for...
Yeah. Well, also, like, that moment when Estraven makes that decision, it's like, oh, he's in jail. It's a remote jail. It would be incredibly hard to break him out and he'd probably die. Okay, let's go. And he just goes.
He uses his doth strength.
Yes.
Takes a lot out of him.
Yeah, but also the commitment to know, okay, basically it's like I'm going to the Arctic and I am going to go with very little equipment, and it's going to be incredibly hard, and it's going to take a long, long time, and no one will help me, and they'll kill me if they find me.
And then I have to make a many months journey back to Carhide.
Yeah, there's like the most ridiculously hard prison break that you can imagine.
It didn't seem that hard, though.
Well,
once he actually got to it.
Well, no, because it was such a remote jail that it would be ridiculous to try to get anyone out of it. And so they didn't guard it terribly hard because, you know, as you can see, the effort it would take to do it would kill most people.
Yeah, the actual breakout wasn't hard, but the whole getting back to civilization, that was, like you said, a huge chunk of the book.
Yeah. I will say the plot went in directions I didn't expect it to, but it wasn't like a strong, powerful plot that is driving you reading it. It's really more the finding out how it turns out. I mean, you do want to find out how it turns out.
But that's what I found out after reading it and then dipping back into it. I felt like because the plot was so spotty that I've been able to go into it at different points of the book and just read little passages and get something out of them much more than when I read it the first time. Because, you know, when you read a book for the first time, you're like, okay, and then what happens? And then what happens? And this book didn't really give us that kind of satisfaction because it felt disjointed, because it is written as like a report for some of it. And then it's written like folk tales. And then you get like Estraven's diary or something, different voices kind of putting together this story as a whole. And so it doesn't really hold together as a cohesive, but I'm thinking that maybe stories that don't have the same rereadability that maybe this one does, and maybe not the same, maybe like staying power. Like this book was published in like 69. So it's what, 55 years. We're talking about 55 years later, and the things that she's talking about in this book, we're still talking about. You know, she's embraced some super interesting ideas.
So I get why you felt really kind of lukewarm about the book. And I will say for myself, like, I should mention, because I'm famous for finishing the book on the last day or so. I finished it like 2 days ago.
Oh, wow.
But I've been reading.
When I saw you 2 weeks ago, you had started it.
I know, that's the thing. It took me quite a bit longer to read than I thought, because I was reading bits, and then, like you said, it wasn't like, I got to read the next bit. But it also wasn't like I dreaded reading the next bit. It was like, I guess I'll read a bit. And then after a bit, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do something else now. You know, it was...
It's deceptive.
It's not a struggle.
It's not a long, big book when you look at it, but it takes an effort to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I didn't find it like a difficult effort. It's just that it wasn't pulling me in and dragging me along like some books can. It was interesting, but not like gripping. You know, it's thoughtful, but not like occupying all my thoughts. Yeah.
What's interesting too is, I don't know, like I've read a couple other Ursula Le Guin novels, especially there's one called The Lathe of Heaven, and that one is written much more in like she's the narrator, and it's a totally different kind of style and much easier to read, actually. It's about this guy who has these dreams, and the dreams can change the world. So he goes to a psychiatrist to get help, and the psychiatrist is evil-minded, and he plants things that this guy should dream about because he wants the guy wants something to happen. So it's this really interesting, almost like a Alfred Hitchcock Presents, like Twilight Zone idea, but a very different feel to this one. So it's almost like she was, I don't know, going over, like even the language, it feels like maybe outdated, but also timeless. Like there aren't a lot of things like the technology in it that feel like it's really, oh, that's really aged. I mean, there's not a ton of technology. There's that Ansible, which is like, you know, a pager that you can, or a, like, you know, a modem.
Not like a radio.
Yeah.
Like a radio.
Yeah, exactly. And like the machines that only go however 30 miles an hour, because they're like, why would we want to go faster? And so she doesn't spend a lot of time on the tech, which maybe has given this book a little bit more longevity than other science fiction books.
It's a very idea-focused book, so and that can tend to go longer as long as you don't lock yourself into something weird. Do we have more we want to talk about, or should we jump on to our next section?
I mean, we really didn't talk about Estraven that much, but I could take it or leave it. I mean, I didn't make this up, but he chemmered with his sibling, right? And had a kid? Yeah, okay.
And that was okay. Apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although once you chemmer with a sibling, you can't be chemmer mates? What was that called?
Well, no, I think that was in general. When you chemmer with someone, then the next time you should be chemmering with someone else.
Oh, okay.
But also with siblings. They said there isn't a taboo against chemmering with a sibling, but if you do conceive, you can't pledge... Was it called Kemmerline? Like where it was it was sort of akin to marriage or long-term partnership. Yeah,
like monogamy was not really a thing, and they seemed to discourage monogamy, and that was an unusual thing.
Estraven, he was known as the traitor because he also was he was the one who ceded some of the lands.
Well, he was trying to avoid conflict by moving farmers out of the disputed territory.
Yeah.
And then that was taken as a betrayal of his country because the king did want to have conflict, or at least didn't want to give up that property.
Yeah. But wasn't there another story about his brother and...
Well, there was a story that was,
folktale?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It seemed like a folktale, but it maybe wasn't.
But wasn't his name also Estraven?
It was very similar.
Was it like his ancestor? Or something?
Yeah.
It was a little confusing.
Yeah, the names were a little confusing. Like when there was a full name, because I assume it had like a place of birth or a family name, and then multiple people would have that same piece in the name.
Yeah. Well, like Estraven seemed like a title too. Because when he was in Orgorin, then he wasn't wanting to be referred to as Estraven.
Oh, it was like Harg or whatever his other name was.
Yeah, I think that when they were traveling over the ice together, he told Genly to call him something else, didn't he?
He had a first name and a last name and then a title. So he stopped using Estraven, but did have the first name and last name. And initially, he said use the last name effectively until they finally
became buds.
Yeah. And it's the, best friends forever. Yay. You can use my first name now. Yeah, he was a good character, though.
Yeah, he was my favorite. Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of choices here. But.
No, but you could kind of tell from the beginning as a reader that he wasn't, even though Genly wasn't trusting him, that he wasn't distrustful. Like, there wasn't a reason to distrust him.
Although the king distrusted him, so...
Yeah, but the king was mad. Yes. Everyone called him the Mad King.
That's true.
Well, he distrusted him because he felt that Estraven was he was pushing the idea of the envoy like an ecumen, right? And then the king saw that as a betrayal of or a threat to his own authority.
Yeah.
Too?
Yeah, that would be fair. And that's also why they had sent just one envoy, so that it wouldn't be seen as we're trying to take you over. Right. Try to be as gentle as possible. Say, no, we just want to talk. We want to trade stuff. That's it.
We'll send this one guy, and he's not super good at small talk or manners or other cultures. So be patient with him.
Yeah. Well, I will say I like the idea that basically the ecumen's approach to this was, we'll send a person. If they die, we'll come back in 50 years and try again. Yeah. And we'll just keep sending one person until everything's okay, and then we'll send some more.
They're definitely playing the long game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't care. And I love this thing of what happens if I send you away? Well, I'll go back on my starship and go home, and then I'll turn around and come right back, and it'll be 30 years to you guys, but it'll be nothing to me. So it doesn't matter. We don't care. We'll wait until you're ready. And also, I had this feeling he finally becomes friends with Estraven, really, really close. And then Estraven dies. You could understand if he was like, well, screw you guys. We're not letting you join or something like that. But it's like, no, the higher mission was much more important, well beyond any individual sacrifice, so it's just like, no, I'm not going to stop this. It has to happen now. That was nice.
Well, because Estraven wanted that, right? Like he really wanted
He did.
it. So it was honoring their memory as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And that nice little sweet coda about him going to the
His
historical
family.
land and seeing his son, and he said, "Tell me all about the stories. Tell me about the other planets." And I thought that was
It was a good
it warmed my cold Gathenian heart.
It was a good finish, yeah. So, recommend the book?
Not particularly.
I mean, it would have to come up in a particular way. Like if I wouldn't just say, "Hey, you got to read this book. It's great." There are situations when I might recommend it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't wholeheartedly, unreservedly recommend it. I don't think.
Yeah, same. There's like a specific person I think this book would be good for, and I'm not that person.
Like, I feel like if I just like in a conversation with somebody found out that a person was an Ursula Le Guin fan and asked them, "Oh, have you read Left Hand of Darkness?" And they had, I think we could have a pretty good conversation. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I'd be the one that would want to instigate that conversation with a stranger or someone who hasn't read it. Like I don't feel like I can like evangelize the book. But the more I'm thinking about it, maybe ask me 6 months from now, maybe I'd be all a complete Le Guin head at that point, and I'd be like, I don't know.
I liked it more than the Apollo murders.
Me too.
We're on our way up. Yeah, I would say I'd probably recommend it to anybody who's looking for something thoughtful and like with an interesting world, with an interesting universe to think about. But yeah, it's not fast paced. It's slower paced. It ain't perfect, but it's interesting. So if that's what you're looking for, yeah. Okay, so with that, let's talk about books we might also like if we like this book. Anyone got a book recommendation?
I think we all have a book recommendation.
Yes.
That's shocking. I ask every time and you guys keep coming through.
I know. I mean, why bother asking?
It's a thing. It's a thing. It's framework.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder if one time Toby I'd be like, yeah, no, we don't really have anything, actually.
Yeah. Why didn't you tell us you wanted that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could go first. I have it right in front of me. I found a book called Ammonite, not to be confused with Mennonite. Mm-hmm. Totally different book. This Ammonite by Nicola Griffith. And one of the things that jumped out at me is that it was blurbed by Ursula Le Guin herself. She called it a knockout first novel with strong, likable characters, a compelling story, and a very interesting take on gender. So if you enjoyed the gender discussion that we just had or wanted to learn more about what Ursula Le Guin talks about in Left Hand of Darkness, this book is also science fiction. It takes place on the unfortunately named planet Jeep. I'm not sure.
Jeep.
Yeah,
How do you spell that?
Jeep.
Oh, okay.
And what's happened there is a virus has killed all the men and most of the women. So there's a very small community of women that are living on this planet. So the protagonist is an anthropologist, Margie, I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong, Tyson, who has been sent by a company to investigate and study the planet's inhabitants and try to figure out the virus, where did it come from. And so you, instead of having a planet of people with no determined genders, you have a planet of all women. So if that's your thing. And so it's an interesting story. Again, there's a bit of world building and like what would a society look like if there were no men, and the women develop different ways of dealing with things. And then as the story goes on, a little bit more, maybe sinister things have been revealed about the origin of the virus and that kind of thing. So yeah. Ammonite by Nicola Griffith, I recommend.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just did.
The book I'm recommending is Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. This is a book of science fiction short stories that, like The Left Hand of Darkness, are very anthropological, very philosophical. There's a story about a literal tower that's being built to heaven, and it's taken decades, and people who work on it actually have to live on the tower because it just takes so long to climb it. And then what happens when they actually reach heaven. There's a story about a future in which the ability to perceive physical attractiveness can be toggled on and off, and the implications of that, specifically in a university setting. The titular story, Story of Your Life, is the story the movie Arrival is based on. Have you seen Arrival?
Yes.
Oh, it's so good. It's so devastating, but it's excellent. So that story follows a linguist as she communicates with alien visitors. So just like a very kind of similar vibes, but more contemporary book that I think people who like this one will really like that one. So that's Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang.
When I was reading this one and I was thinking, what should I recommend? I thought, I don't know if I've read anything quite like this. So I looked for read-alikes online. I came across this nice Reddit thread where people were sharing books that they liked. And I thought, man, I've read like half of these. So it turns out I have read books that kind of go in the same vein. When I realized what people were clicking on, is I had many options, and I decided on Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks. This is the first book, The Left Hand of Darkness is actually part of a series, the Hainish series, named after the people who initially populated all these planets, including Earth and Gethin. In Ian Banks' series, it's set in a place called The Culture, which is a utopian post-scarcity space society of humanoid aliens and advanced superintelligent artificial intelligences living in artificial habitats spread across the Milky Way. Consider Phlebas is set during a war between the Culture and the Idirans and is mainly told from the perspective of an Idiran agent working against the Culture. Like Left Hand of Darkness, Consider Phlebas and other books in the Culture series are interesting in and of themselves. Like the storyline in this one is an action and adventure space opera, which is magnificent. I think it would make a fantastic series on Netflix or Prime or something like that. It's got a great story. The characters are fascinating. But the thing that hooks you is the descriptions of the culture in the background. This is where humanity has figured out all its material needs and has superintelligent artificial intelligences running everything so that people are free to do anything. You want a job? They'll get you a job. You don't want to do anything? You want to play games all day? You can play games all day. Do you not like your gender, or do you want to try the other one? Or, go ahead. We got a system to do that. Want to switch back? No problem. You can live as long as you want. Tired of life? Don't want it to end? You can do that. Like, they genetically modify you so that you have glands that you can activate to simulate almost any kind of drug. So you want to get high? You can think it. You want to focus? You can do that too. It's a utopia, but it's always the edges where things happen, and that's where the books tend to focus. Unfortunately, it does not look like we have a copy of this one in our collection anymore. We do have other books in the Culture series, and they are all standalone, just like Left Hand of Darkness is standalone in this series, so you can jump in anywhere. But if you can get a hold of Consider Phlebas, I would recommend it strongly because I thought it was an amazing book, a lot of fun. And again, it's the ideas behind it that make it even more interesting and give it a lasting strength, I think.
Are they really quite thick books? Because I'm thinking I may have seen them on the shelf. I have never read one, but
they're not short books, I don't think. But I mean, it's one of those books that draw me in. So far, I've only read 2 of them. To be fair, also read The Player of Games, which is interesting. Don't remember how long they were, which I think is a good thing to say about a book. So now for everyone's favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, in which our linguistically curious panelists tell you about a word that calls to our hearts. So, words.
I've got a word that I started thinking of shortly after I finished reading this book, and it's probably no surprise that my word this month is ambiguity. So, of course, that's the quality of being open to more than one interpretation or meaning, often leading to uncertainty or confusion. It describes situations or statements that can be understood in multiple ways, lacking clarity or definitiveness. So the word comes, like most of words we talk about, comes from the Latin, and the Latin, is to wander or to go about, which I think is kind of interesting because it's kind of like, well, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit, and then we'll go this way, and we'll kind of end up over here. And I feel like that's sort of how I felt after reading Left Hand of Darkness, was that there were many ways to interpret the things in there, and that often in our modern society, we consider ambiguity as a negative thing, like ambiguity at work or trying to minimize ambiguity, or, we want things straight. But I think there's also a quality of ambiguity that provides us to have multiple interpretations or to have discussions about things like the foretelling ritual that, what the hell did we just read? And that's okay too. And then to understand that ambiguity has its place. So ambiguity.
Nice.
So I was feeling a little uninspired this month, so I turned to my favorite British etymologist, Susie Dent, and I found a recent article by her about how the word Beyoncé, as in the singer, was recently added to Le Petit Larousse, which is a French dictionary. And it's actually an encyclopedic dictionary, and Beyoncé's entry is biographical rather than a word with its own definition. But Susie Dent writes about other names that have evolved into actual words, so something like, we might call a great tragedy Shakespearean. We might call rental conditions Dickensian. The word Tarantino-esque is in the dictionary for a style of cinema characterized by violence and sharp dialogue. She also writes about a 19th century criminal named Alex Hogue, who was referred to as Smart Alec by the NYPD because he considered himself smarter than the rest of them. There was a Texas cattle rancher named Maverick who refused to brand his cows, and so he came to be seen as an outlier who didn't conform to the norm. And I just thought those were fun, something for us all to aspire to, having our names in the dictionary, although Toby is already in the dictionary, though it refers to a mug in the form of a stout old man wearing a three-cornered hat. So maybe I can change it.
Someday Toby will be to leave a great review on Instagram for a book.
Nice. Yep.
And an author will respond and you become besties.
Yes.
I'm feeling generous today, so I've got a 3-for-1 deal on nerd words based on a single sentence from the book. They are anything but a phlegmatic people, yet they are obdurate, they are pertinacious, they finish plastering joints.
Whoa.
It's one of those things that I had to look up multiple words to make sure I was really getting it. So phlegmatic means showing little emotion, and yeah, it's related to phlegm.
Can also someone who is phlegmy be considered phlegmatic?
It depends if they show emotion about being phlegmy, I guess. Okay. Obdurate is stubbornly persistent in wrongdoing or showing unfeeling resistance to tender feelings. And pertinacious is stubbornly unyielding. So basically they weren't an unemotional people, but they were stubborn as heck. And they got stuff done.
She could have just said that.
Yeah, no, but at the beginning especially, I found there were a bunch of these words that I know but don't know that well and didn't feel confident in. And again, seems kind of like judgmental. This is like, yeah, these people are kind of emotional and they're jerks. It almost comes across like that.
And this is Genley's report?
This is, this is what Genley was saying, yeah.
Jeez.
But, so there you go. Phlegmatic, obdurate, and pertinacious. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this month. Thank you so much for joining us, dear readers. For our next episode, we're going to read and discuss Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. When 14-year-old Lamia H. realizes she has a crush on her teacher, her female teacher, she covers up her attraction, an attraction she can't yet name, by playing up her roles as overachiever and class clown. Born in South Asia, she moved to the Middle East at a young age and has spent years feeling out of place, like her own desires and dreams don't matter, and it's easier to hide in plain sight, to disappear. But one day, in Quran class, she reads a passage about Maryam that changes everything. When Maryam learned that she was pregnant, she insisted no man had touched her. Could Maryam, uninterested in men, be like Lamia? From that moment on, Lamia makes sense of her struggles and triumphs by comparing her experiences with some of the most famous stories in the Quran. She juxtaposes her coming out with Musa liberating his people from the Pharaoh, asks if Allah, who is neither male nor female, might instead be non-binary, and drawing on the faith and hope Noah needed to construct his ark, begins to build a life of her own, ultimately finding that the answer to her lifelong quest for community and belonging lies in owning her identity as a queer, devout Muslim immigrant. The searingly intimate memoir in essays, spanning Lamia's childhood to her arrival in the United States for college through early adult life in New York City, tells a universal story of courage, trust, and love, celebrating what it means to be a seeker and an architect of one's own life. Have comments or book suggestions for us? Send us an email. You can find all our contact info at the bottom of the page at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. You can also find our past episodes there too. If you haven't already, subscribe to Time to Read on your favorite podcasting service and maybe leave us a review. Tell your book-loving friends about us too. And until next time, make sure you find Time to Read.
All I need is time.
I'm Dennis from the Idea Mill, and to borrow a phrase from Father Ted, any discussions about forming a planetary alliance would be an ecumenical manner. Sorry, I gotta say that again. Any discussions about forming a planetary... any discussions about... I know how to talk.
I was not expecting a Father Ted reference.
I know, right?
Who's Father Ted?
Oh, it's this show. It's
the
British...
best Irish comedy of all time. And in a poll taken in 2017, it was nominated as the second funniest British sitcom after Fawlty Towers.
Oh.
It is marvelous.
It's great.
Okay.
And what was his assistant, Dougal or someone?
Dougal,
Yeah.
and then Father Jack.
That's right. Oh, he's the drunk.
The violent drunk.
Yeah. I wonder if it's on YouTube.